You are tuned in to another edition of Americana Music Profiles, brought to you by Americana Rhythm Music Magazine and AmericanaMusicMagazine.com. I'm your host, Greg Tutwiler. Let's jump right in to the next exciting interview. Yale Strom's life credits are many. Here are just a few. He has composed original music for theater, film, and television, and his musical compositions have been performed by many orchestras. He is a professor and artist in residence in the Jewish Studies program at San Diego State University and has 15 CDs to his credit. Today, we're going to talk about his latest, Shimmering Lights. Yale, along with Elizabeth Swartz, co-producer of the project, are my guests on this edition of Americana Music Profiles. Well, Yale and Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast this afternoon. It's an honor to get to chat with you folks.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Greg. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome.
We're looking forward to it.
So we've got you've got a neat, interesting new CD project that we want to talk about. But I thought, if you don't mind, if we jump back just a little bit, Yale, give me a little bit of background about yourself. I know you've done a lot of neat things, have been playing music for a while, and so maybe for some of the folks who don't know who you are yet, let's give them a little bit about who you are, and then we'll move into the new CD.
Okay, well, my name is Yale Strom, and I've been an artist for many decades now, working in both film, music, theater, photography, and literature. And people can, find me on the web, just yalestrom.com,
right,
and read about the books, etc. I've done a lot of work specifically looking at and exploring Jewish culture in Eastern Europe, as well as Roma culture in Eastern Europe, and specifically looking at the folk music of the two peoples and how they, came together sometimes. And so I was initially interested in the music, per se, the notes, the music, the scales, etc. But then I really became more interested in the culture of the music, what makes the people play a certain way, and their travels, and how do they get along, don't get along with their neighbors, etc. So and I'm specifically talking about klezmer music, Klezmer, but it expanded to other folk musics of Eastern Europe, and so a lot of my work has focused on some aspect of these cultures, Jewish culture, Roma culture, in these regions. But I've expanded. I've done work in the Balkans and stuff about Western Europe, etc. And but I guess that's what kind of brings me to why I'm speaking to you.
Why the klezmer? What was it about that fascinated you?
Well, it's the music of the Jews that we call Ashkenazim, Central and Eastern European Jews. Every culture has folk music, so this is the folk music of these particular Jews, where my family comes from. Elizabeth as well. Several generations they have come, before. We all come from somewhere in the Middle East as Semites, but definitely many hundreds of years in Central and Eastern Europe. And music is a very important part of anybody's culture. It is an identifying mark. And so I was curious about this music. I grew up with Jewish music in the home, in the synagogue, singing songs, hearing some music on the records, and as I said, hearing various tunes for various Jewish holidays. But I became more interested in it when the revival, so to speak, when American young Jews who had been playing bluegrass or jazz,
right,
had been playing everything but their own folk music, kind of were confronted by non-Jews saying, "Hey, well, what about your own folk music?
Right, yeah.
What is it?" And slowly but surely, from the mid-'70s onwards, several bands, several people were doing research and got interested in it. And being a violinist and just loving all kinds of music, I got interested. I wanted to join a klezmer band in San Diego, and it just didn't work out. They didn't need another violinist, whatever. And so that really was kind of the impetus. I said, well, okay, I instead of joining, I'll form my own band. But I wanted to form it with some unique repertoire that would not be as easily found here in the United States, even in the archives. And that was perhaps melodies, tunes that are unknown to us because they're only in the memories of those few Holocaust survivors or even Roma musicians who remember them, or maybe some archives we don't know about in Eastern Europe. And so that was it. That was a kind of a simple, trajectory. I just bought this one-way ticket and began the research, and of course, many decades later, I've have done many other things, but that was kind of it. I was curious about knowing more about my own culture, where my grandparents come from and great-grandparents, and the music was the portal into which I sort of became obsessed with knowing more about Yiddish culture.
Do you find that it is sort of still contained within the Jewish culture, even in this country, or is that style of music starting to bleed out into other cultures and other influence other styles of music now?
Oh, it definitely has bled out, so to speak, as you say. Let's take Europe, for example. In the last 20 years, 25 years, for example, Roma music has become much more popular, particularly Roma music from the Balkans. It has a very strong rhythm, strong sounds because it's pushed by tuba, trombones, and trumpets. So young people, because young people help push culture along, and what they buy, what they like, what they attend, kind of sets a certain tone for the society at large during that time. And so this music had elements of klezmer music. Some of it was klezmer melodies. Of course, just the revival of klezmer itself. There were many non-Jews. Forget about the Jews who sort of decided to rediscover their roots. But non-Jews are saying, wow, this is interesting music about people that my parents or grandparents or great-grandparents talked about, whether in a positive way or sadly in a negative way. And they obviously had more than just a little influence. They had maybe a great influence on my particular community, my village, my town, my city in many ways. So who are these people? And these young Gentiles in Germany, Poland, France, even parts of Italy, and then, of course, the rest of Eastern Europe, who became interested in this kind of exotic culture for them. It was exotic of a people that's not really here that much, or very few of them are here. And, of course, in the United States as well. I would say it's actually more integrated in Europe because it's more of a European music. It's the roots of it are Semitic, Middle Eastern, and then the European sounds. Where in America, it's definitely something that came from across the ocean. Jews brought it with them, as well as Slavs and so forth. And you do hear it. I mean, you hear there was a period of time in the 20s to the 40s where Jewish composers and musicians and African-American composers and musicians and lyricists were sometimes combining the two elements of their genres into what some might call Yiddish swing, or jazz melodies that had Jewish lyrics in terms of about Jewish culture, often humorous, but being sung by and written by African Americans, like Cab Calloway, for example, or Slim Galliard, for example. So it has become more popular. Is it a mainstream folk music genre? No, but you hear it. You hear it now on television and films and podcasts and wherever young people get popular culture. Anybody gets popular culture. So it's not so unusual. But we're still trying to always enlighten the public who says klezmer. I've never heard the word, but I like the music. It sounds intriguing, interesting.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that point to light, because in the Americana genre, we the early settlers coming into the country and then moving into the mountains, and we have the bluegrass and the folk and string music kind of coming from that. But then you also have that music being influenced by the African American slave community in the earlier days, and why not also that music being influenced by the Jewish community coming into this country as well. And so really kind of the Americana bluegrass music is sort of a big melting pot of all of the cultures kind of being extracted, even if it wasn't consciously. People hearing music on the streets or in the fields or wherever it may have been coming from, and when they sit down to create their own music, they're being influenced and don't even realize it. So I appreciate the connection too there.
Right. Well, I think a lot of Americans who love what they call in the American Songbook, the great tunes from the 20s, let's say 40s, so many, a large majority of them written by Jews, whether they wrote the music or they wrote the music and the lyrics.
Right, okay.
And, it's, and they took certain keys, minor keys in particular, certain kind of notation structure that people just take for granted. It's part of the American folk music.
Right,
Jews did bring it. And of course, Jews are, Gentiles and everybody else in between loves these songs. Or there's some of the most popular songs in the world. I mean,
yeah.
I tell my students the most recorded song in the world. The most recorded song in the world is a song written by two Jews. It's called "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." It's been recorded more times than any more languages, more than any national anthem of the world.
Yeah.
And we won't talk about all the Jewish influences and just the cultural parts about it in terms of the lyrics, but. So so maybe klezmer hasn't really influenced directly,
right? But
American music, but certainly Jewish culture has.
Sure, yeah. And you mentioned some of your students. Do I understand correctly that if not presently, you also did some time teaching at Yale? Is that right?
No, that's my namesake, Yale. No, I taught at NYU.
NYU, okay. I'm sorry. Right.
NYU.
Right. Yeah.
And I currently teach at San Diego State University.
Okay, all right. I easy to make the the faux pas there, but I remember you telling me that you were doing some instruction too. So that's cool. So to kind of bring it full circle, you have a new record that's holiday, I suppose we'll call it. Hanukkah, obviously being a Jewish holiday, but out kind of in the summertime. What was the motivation for that? Well,
the motivation to do this recording with our label ARC really was from Elizabeth. I'll let her jump in here now. I certainly had a lot of creative ideas, and I'll talk about those, but the motivation came from Elizabeth.
Well, to be honest, I think every recording artist gets to a certain point after the third, fourth, fifth, I think in our case, 13th release, where you say it's time to do my Christmas album. But we all celebrate Christmas, so.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's actually not entirely untrue. In fact, that really was one of the major motivating factors. But I was just listening to one of my favorite world music stations when they were, right around Hanukkah, and I thought, wow, these are wonderful songs, and I think some of these recordings are, maybe 20 years old. So I thought, wow, I think it's time. Mm-hmm. It's about time for someone to put out a new recording. So those were factors, but to be honest, we had also, along the road, met so many of these wonderful musicians who aren't part of our, daily ensemble, mm-hmm. Yale Strom and Pastrami, and we really wanted to work with them, and so we had separately been thinking about how could we do a recording that was all strings and vocals, and those two separate streams sort of came together in this one idea.
Are these original songs, or were these songs that are, you mentioned earlier, songs that had been in the community for a while, or is it a combination of both? What's the theme of the songs on the record?
Well, the songs are all songs to celebrate